far from good enough. Not enough to eradicate world poverty, nor to create the number of jobs we require, nor to generate the tax revenues that governments need to service heavy debt loads, while attending to vast investment needs, including for the green transition. This picture is made more troubling by high and rising public debt, way higher than before the pandemic. Even after the brief but significant fall in debt to GDP as inflation lifted nominal GDP. And do please notice the shaded area on this chart. What it shows is that in severe but plausible adverse scenario, that could climb some 20 percentage points of GDP above our baseline. What does it mean for fiscal space? To answer this question, let's look at the share of government revenue consumed by interest payments. This is where high debt, high interest rates, and low growth come together, because it is growth that generates the revenue governments need to function and invest. As debt increases, fiscal space contracts disproportionately more in low-income countries. Not all debt burdens are made equal. And fiscal space keeps shrinking. Just look at the frightening evolution of the interest to revenue ratio over time. We can immediately see how the tough spending choices have become tougher, with higher debt payments hanging on our heads. Schools or climate? Digital connectivity or roads and bridges? This is what it comes down to, making these tough choices. And to make matters worse, we live in deeply troubled times. The peace dividend from the end of the Cold War that Andrea talked about, I experienced on the colder side of it, is increasingly at risk. In a world of more wars and more insecurity, defense expenditures may well keep rising while aid budgets fall further behind the growing needs of developing countries. Not only is development assistance too small, but major
En directo, la presidenta del Fondo Monetario Internacional, Kristalina Georgieva, analizando las consecuencias, el impacto de la guerra en Ucrania, además de otras tensiones geopolíticas y cómo impacta en el crecimiento global. Dice Kristalina Georgieva que hay que elegir entre educación o guerras, entre conectividad digital o gasto en defensa, y advertía también de que vivimos tiempos profundamente difíciles, que los riesgos van en aumento y también se están produciendo un aumento excesivo en defensa. Seguimos escuchando a Kristalina Georgieva. En directo, Kristalina Georgieva, la directora gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional, en su discurso sobre las perspectivas de la economía mundial y las prioridades políticas. Dice Kristalina Georgieva que la clave está en el crecimiento porque generará más oportunidades de trabajo, más beneficio empresarial y más estabilidad. La cuestión es cómo, se pregunta cómo, y reconoce que hay que poner el foco en las reformas y además apremia a los gobiernos a acometer esas reformas, poniendo el foco en que no hay tiempo que perder. Decía también en ese sentido que la migración puede ayudar a emprender este tipo de reformas.
Oversight must not only ensure stability and resilience, but also encourage prudent risk-taking and value creation. By the way, a message also for us at the fund. Third area, enhance productivity. Well, this is what yields more output per unit of input, and there are many ways to raise it, from improving governance and institutions to cutting red tape to harnessing the power of artificial intelligence. More and better spending on education and R&D. Among advanced economies, those that lead on innovation show what works. Venture capital industries, ecosystems that bring not only financing, but knowledge, advice, and professional networks, screening new ideas, identifying winners, feeding them from birth to graduation. And these lessons can be learned by everyone. What we have seen over the last years, tragically, is that the pace of reform has been slowing since the global financial crisis, as discontent has risen. But progress is possible. We have a new study that shows that resistance to reforms is often driven by beliefs and misperceptions about the reforms themselves, as well as the distributional effects of these reforms. How can we best develop them? Well, two-way dialogue with the public, with measures to mitigate the impact of those who risk losing out. We have learned how much this matters.
En directo, la directora gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional, Kristalina Georgieva, lanzando un nuevo recado a los gobiernos, dice que podemos hacerlo mejor y por ello deben reducir deuda. Dice que la política fiscal no es fácil, pero es necesaria porque de ello depende el crecimiento, que es la clave para el empleo, para lograr estabilidad de los países y beneficios empresariales. También incidía en la necesidad de mayores inversiones en I+D, porque dice Kristalina Georgieva, el progreso es posible.
To the top of the list of concerns for many countries has risen for many understandable and good reasons. This has happened before, but it never happened at the time of such economic codependency. So my argument is that we must not allow this reality to become an excuse to do nothing to prevent a further fracturing of the global economy. Quite the opposite. My appeal during these annual meetings will be, let's work together in an enlightened way to lift our collective prospects. Let us not take the global tensions as given, but rather resolve to work to lower the geopolitical temperature and attend to the tasks that can only be tackled together. Trade, which has lowered prices, improved quality, created jobs, and is still showing remarkable resilience in the face of new barriers, often flowing around them via third countries. But we need to recognize redirection can only take us that far, and we cannot assume it will continue indefinitely. So we have to get on the page of protecting what works well in our trade system. Second, and this one is truly existential, climate. Countries that contribute the least to it are the most negatively impacted. Unexpected global warming moving actually faster than we thought. You read every book and it says, oops, we were wrong, it is worse. Glaciers melting, ice cap crumbling, average weather events have telegraphed a frightening message from the future. We know what we must do. Create fiscal space for the green transition, eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, get capital to where it is most needed. And 3, artificial intelligence, our single best shot at the higher productivity. If it is managed well, it has the potential to lift world growth by up to 0.8 percentage points. With that alone, we are likely to not only reach our pre-pandemic higher average growth, but even potentially exceed it. Yet what
Kristalina Georgieva, la directora gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional, dejando nuevas ideas para mejorar el crecimiento económico. Decía, debemos eliminar los subsidios a los combustibles fósiles y apostar más deliberadamente por la inteligencia artificial. Dice que podemos proteger los empleos con nuestro sistema de comercio. Dice que el progreso es posible y que se necesita mayor voluntad de diálogo entre los Estados miembros.
Bottom line is that there are areas where we need to work together. And sometimes we need to relearn to work together. And we at the IMF, we are born from this basic idea: pool resources, everybody is better off. We have a role to play. Andrea has already mentioned in my first term, it was anything but boring. It was a really hard time, and we have done a lot. We have injected historically high liquidity, $1 trillion, you mentioned this number. More important than the money, we kept our membership together so they can synchronize policy action at the time of very high uncertainty. And now we are in the first days of my second term. We deliver again. Our executive board, in full consensus, not a single abstention, approved important reforms that reinforce our strong financial position and directly benefit the membership, reducing charges and surcharges on our regular lending, putting in place a comprehensive package to secure our concessional lending capacity to support low-income countries. And I see quite a number of people who have worked on that, Bernard, Jayla. It was a very heavy lift, but it got done. Andrea mentioned we are going to have a third board member for Sub-Saharan Africa. I can disclose that this new chair would be held by Côte d'Ivoire, and that ensures more voice for underrepresented region. And when we look at all this, the quarter increase, the actions we have taken, what they do is they give.
Kristalina Georgieva, en directo, ese meeting, esa comparecencia de las perspectivas económicas mundiales preparadas por el Fondo Monetario Internacional. Dice Kristalina Georgieva que su principal preocupación es la desaceleración sincronizada del crecimiento global. También recuerda que las buenas noticias son que la ola inflacionista a escala mundial va enfriándose, pero hace falta una combinación de medidas decididas en política monetaria, además de aliviar las restricciones de la cadena de suministro y la moderación de los precios de los alimentos y de la energía, que, dice, afortunadamente están contribuyendo a una estabilización de los precios.
of this decade. And if I am granted one wish, it would simply be this. Let this decade be remembered not as one where we allowed conflicts to get in the way of existential tasks, storing up vast costs and misery for those who would follow. Let it be remembered as a time when we rose above our differences for the good of all, for our mutual prosperity, and ultimately for our survival. I say, we can do better. Let there be peace on earth and let cooperation flourish. We can do better. Thank you.
Acaba de terminar esa exposición de la directora gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional, Kristalina Georgieva, hablando sobre las consecuencias de esa recesión mundial, los riesgos que pueden conducir a una recesión de la economía a escala global, la pérdida de empleos a gran escala y con alusiones a la pandemia. También ha dicho que la asistencia al desarrollo es demasiado pequeña y que hace falta mayor contribución de los principales actores por la falta, decía, también de seguridad nacional, también políticas proteccionistas que están contribuyendo a una política industrial infradesarrollada y también restricciones comerciales. También dice que en el futuro el comercio no será el mismo motor de crecimiento que antes. Volvía a aludir a esa apuesta decidida por la inteligencia artificial. Dice que es la fractura que ya advirtió en el año 2019, pero peor. Dice, es como echar agua fría a una economía mundial que ya está tibia.
You know, we're here in the United States where an election will decide many things in just a few weeks. As you prepare for these annual meetings next week, how worried are you about the global economy and the headwinds that we face? I mean, it does seem like the challenges are daunting and the risks are on the downside.
This is a very interesting situation we find ourselves to be, because it combines better than expected performance of the world economy and risks to the downside. So when we are assessing the situation, what I want to emphasize is that incredible resilience we have demonstrated, Andrea, over the last years, and especially in this last year when we were fighting inflation, it does come from years and years and years of investing in strong institutions and also investing in the world having channels of communication, ability to engage. And this investment, I don't think is gone. It actually, we will see it next week continuing. My expectation is that we will see governors and ministers coming here, living outside their differences. I mean, the line I would use is leave your trade war out, leave your Cold War out. If, God forbid, if you have a hot war, leave it out. And if you have a proxy war, leave it out. And engage on the important policy choices that I just outlined that are very pressing for us. It's a mixed picture when you look at the world, and just in a couple of days we will come with the growth projections. What we see is, compared to historical performance, China is slowing down, India is accelerating, and some other parts of Asia accelerating. The US is doing quite well. Europe can do better. So in that picture, I think the issue that would dominate is, are we going to ride on the opportunities that we are presented with by technology and by the instruments of collaboration we have built, or we would retreat to a worse position. You heard me. I think each and every one of us, in whatever we do, institutionally, individually, we have a very important responsibility. I hope the media would take it as well, to work for doing better. And in that sense, I'm not super pessimistic, because if you look at the trajectory of the world economy, yeah, we can do better, but we can also do much worse. So we will see how the conversation goes. My expectation is people would leave from here somewhat uplifted, somewhat more scared, hopefully scared to get them into high gear to act. We will do our
Kristalina Georgieva contestando las preguntas en este coloquio sobre el informe de las perspectivas económicas mundiales. Dice Kristalina Georgieva que el ritmo de las reformas se han ido desacelerando desde la crisis financiera global a medida que ha ido aumentando el descontento entre la población. Y, por cierto, daba algunas notas. En este caso, destacaba el crecimiento que se prevé para la India. Todavía no ha dado ningún porcentaje, ninguna cifra de crecimiento, pero dice que la India progresa a gran velocidad. Estados Unidos mantiene el crecimiento y, sobre todo, dejaba este apunte para la Unión Europea. Debe mejorar, necesita mejorar, y volvía a poner el foco en la tecnología, en la mayor cooperación internacional, porque dice tenemos una enorme responsabilidad, en alusión a este periodo de guerras que vivimos en el este de Europa y en Oriente Medio. Dice trabajar más para hacerlo mejor, que es uno de los lemas de esta comparecencia de Kristalina Georgieva. We can do it better. Podemos hacerlo mejor. Seguimos escuchando a Georgieva.
Market, then they went into tax reforms, value-added tax reforms. What we see from the data is that growth in Brazil is boosted by somewhere between 0.3, 0.5%. That is significant. Or you look at the performance of India over the years. Remarkable. India was a country in the 90s where you cannot make a step forward because of red tape. Everything needs to be permitted. Permits require, they breed corruption. The country doesn't move. Look at India today. It is a bright spot on the world horizon. So the question really is how to generate that determination and then go to work. I do not want anybody to walk out of here thinking that it is doom and gloom. It is difficult. But there are actions that have been taken by others. You can do it as well.
Okay. I have to say that it's difficult not to be pessimistic or fatalistic about the low growth, high debt conundrum. I mean, it just seems like it's getting worse. So, given the high levels of uncertainty, all the risks in the geopolitical environment, where do you see opportunities for hope? You mentioned AI. How significant of a factor can that be? And can we shift the momentum there on this debt issue?
So there are, on the issue of that, there are three things that need to be done. In countries that are in situation of that is not sustainable, we know what needs to be done. That needs to be restructured. I am encouraged to see speeding up the restructuring process. The Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable is helping to get consensus on some of the policy issues. Ethiopia, if you look at the speed with which Ethiopia moved to restructuring vis-a-vis the first country, Chad, it is night and day. The second thing that needs to be done on debt is to get governments to think about their fiscal consolidation over time. We worry of too fast tightening because you have to find this balance between you're still supporting growth in the economy, but you're getting fiscal consolidation in place. We actually very actively and loudly tell countries, yes, consolidate credibly, but do it over time so you don't suffocate your growth potential. And three, there are things that can help economies to grow. I mean, look at the enormous impact of the green transition and the digital transformation. It is powering up parts of the world in a way that is just amazing. And then when I think about my concern around
Kristalina Georgieva, la directora gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional, en este caso respondiendo a preguntas sobre el potencial que puede tener en el crecimiento global la inteligencia artificial. Dice que es una de las mayores oportunidades para lograr una mayor productividad. Una investigación elaborada por el Fondo Monetario Internacional concluye que la inteligencia artificial, decía Kristalina Georgieva, si se gestiona bien, tiene potencial de impulsar el crecimiento global un 0,8%. Dice que con eso avanzaríamos con una senda de crecimiento mayor que en los años previos a la pandemia. También recuerda que la inteligencia artificial no tiene fronteras porque está en los teléfonos inteligentes en todos los rincones del mundo. Y también hacía alusión a la transición a las energías renovables. Dice, la transición a las energías verdes tienen un gran poder de transformación para aportar también más décimas de crecimiento a escala global.
Again, Andrea, we can say, oh God, it's horrible. Let's go home and lie in bed and cover our heads and go to sleep. Or we can say, this is a tremendous challenge. Let's figure it out.
When during your first term, you pioneered some work that was important in terms of addressing the needs. You mentioned the RST and also you helped set up the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable just to sort of help, particularly China as the largest creditor, but others also work through the issues involved with debt restructuring. What's your next initiative? Where do you see opportunities really, or do you just keep?
I'll tell you. I mean, what we focus at the fund right now are three things. Number one, make sure that this soft landing we talk about actually happens everywhere. Because let's not forget, we have a fleet of soon to be 191 planes. They all have to land softly. This is, I don't take that for given. So that work on helping countries with monetary policy, understanding what needs to be done stays high. But then move the attention to the fiscal side and help countries in this fiscal consolidation that many of them have to do it wisely. Do it pro-growth, not growth suffocating. So that's one big thing. The second one is, if you come to the fund almost every day, there is a discussion around growth, structural reforms for growth, how do you lift up productivity, what we can learn from one country, transmit to the other. For us, yes, we are about monetary policy, macro stability, but let's remember our articles say for growth and employment. And we are very keen to see that ability of countries to grow enhanced by the support of the fund. And three, we are in a world where the changes technologically are so rapid that we risk new shocks to come for which we have a blind spot. Just think about technology affecting financial systems, cross-border payments, the way investments are managed. And that area of risk that is financial stability risk for us, for FSB, for BIS, for central banks, hugely, hugely important. So when you ask me what next for us, I'll tell you, I want the fund to be financially very strong, to anchor our members and lean forward on the issues that matter. to them. And one thing I'm extremely proud, we are financially strong, Andrea. The fund for years and years and years and years and years had a target for precautionary balances. This is what buffers us against risk in our portfolio. And we couldn't reach this target until April this year. So for the first time, I can say we walk our own talk. We tell countries build buffers. Here we are. Our buffer is really strong. So that's how, you know, I'm not thinking of big initiatives. I'm thinking about doing the business of our membership with agility, speed, and of course, quality of the work we do.
Terrific. So in advance of this event, we asked for some
Kristalina Georgieva, dejando algunos titulares, en este caso acaba de decir que se siente profundamente orgullosa de la fortaleza del sistema financiero. También decía que podemos ayudar a las economías a crecer con esa transición a las energías verdes, aunque también ha recordado Kristalina Georgieva que el Fondo Monetario Internacional pronostica un crecimiento a medio plazo que va a ser mediocre, decía, no muy inferior al anterior a la pandemia. Recordemos las últimas previsiones del Fondo Monetario Internacional que se publicaron en el mes de julio dejaban una previsión de crecimiento del PIB global del 3,2% este 2024 y del 3,3% en 2025. Seguimos escuchando la próxima pregunta dirigida a la directora gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional.
Self-interest, whether it's Chinese overcapacity exports, whether it's tariffs in the EU or the US, self-interest sometimes overcomes what you're arguing for, which is global trade, coming together. Where do we start? What changes this trajectory?
The first observation I would like to make, Fred, is that trade has slowed down, but has not gone into reverse. And when you look at the reason for it, it is primarily this very deep interdependence that has been built over decades. What is important to recognize is that it is now mostly advanced economies that are leading the way on restrictions. In the last 18 months, there have been 4,000 industrial policy measures that impact the free flow of trade. 4,000, 60% of them come from advanced economies. So can we work rationally to determine where this is genuinely grounded in national security concerns or in market failures? Yes. Jayla, who is sitting right next to you, her team just published a guidance note on industrial policy. So the job for us, and it defines when it is justified, when it is not, how do we measure costs and benefits, and how we build this in our regular surveillance work so we can help countries make decisions in the future that are grounded in sound analysis. This is our job. And then comes the reform of WTO. It is not going very fast, but it is also not dead. How can more momentum be built practically to make the WHO more acceptable for members? And the three, I put actually a lot of hope on that. What we see as regional cooperation. So you have the world cooling off a little bit on global cooperation. But at the same time, we see ASEAN, Gulf Cooperation Council, countries that are linked by interests, for example, some of the commodity producers. We see in Africa more interest in building Africa-wide free trade arrangements. So how can we use different pathways to build better prospects for growth on the basis of trade continuing to function, although it's not going to be the same engine of growth as it used to be. You, the Atlantic Council, you have also a role to play because you do a lot of this analysis of comparative performance. I think we have to be, one thing I would advise against is don't take it for granted that, oh, well, this is how it is. You know, make the analysis, show the...
Kristalina Georgieva, la directora gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional, afirmando que podemos ayudar a los países a tomar mejores decisiones en el futuro. Dice, ese es nuestro trabajo en el organismo. También decía que el espacio fiscal sigue reduciéndose y que basta mirar a la situación y la evolución de la relación entre los intereses y los ingresos a lo largo del tiempo. También dice que vivimos unos tiempos turbulentos. Dice prácticamente desde que acabó la Guerra Fría, y también citaba el potencial de crecimiento de los países de la ASEAN, el sudeste asiático, los países del Golfo, por su capacidad para producir petróleo, y también hablaba de los intereses que tiene África en el comercio libre.
Hard to dismantle. Getting away, going back is always harder.
Andres, one of the main messages of this industrial policy piece I mentioned is it says, whatever you do, make it temporary. Build an exit door. Don't make it so you cannot leave it. But you're right, occasionally this is the case. Since you mentioned inflation, why are we concerned about trade restrictions and protectionism? Because actually, who pays for it? Who pays for tariffs? It would be the businesses and the consumers, mostly in the country that has created the tariffs. And also, what we see is that there is 3 out of 4. If this is to happen, in 3 out of 4 cases, there would be retaliation. So somebody's going to get hurt because of this. And I think our job is to show that you may have benefits here, but there may be costs there that outweigh these benefits, and help policymakers think through this.
So it's not a panacea.
No, it is not. I mean, there is no silver bullets in very short supply.
Terrific. Let's take a question from Homi Karas from Brookings, please.
Great to see you, Homi.
Thank you so much for the overview. So,
Kristalina Georgieva incidiendo en una mayor movilización de capital porque dice hay abundante dinero en todo el mundo, pero a menudo no en los lugares correctos ni los tipos de inversiones correctos. También decía que la asistencia al desarrollo es demasiado pequeña. Dice los principales actores impulsados por preocupaciones, en este caso de seguridad nacional, están recurriendo cada vez más a políticas industriales y al proteccionismo, advertía Kristalina Georgieva, creando unas restricciones comerciales una tras otra.
public spending, especially in developing countries.
We did a fairly thorough analysis on how to finance adaptation, mitigation, and the transition. And one obvious conclusion was you cannot borrow your way through this problem. It is not possible. So you have to think about ways in which this is why I'm so much emphasizing the importance of growth. You have to find ways in which you bring more dynamism. And here is an interesting, and unless you do that, you are in this caught in catch-22. You do not have fiscal space to invest. As a result, you underinvest, and climate shocks are more damaging to you. What agitates me, honestly, is that there is so much that we know about the way to lift up productivity and growth. I mean, for God's sake, do it. Our staff says that, I mean, it's very interesting. They assess that if countries decide to catch up with the United States, just 15% of the structural measures that are in place here, delivering higher productivity for the United States, they can generate just about a percentage point stronger growth in their economies. In a way, if there were no solutions, I would have said, oh, well, doomed. But there are solutions, and we lack the courage, the determination, the political will to go for them. So the answer to your question is engage with the public, create more appetite for the reforms that ultimately would guarantee our survival.
Terrific. Let's go next to Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief at DevEx.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you. And I appreciate the optimistic message. I was with you a couple of years ago when you had one of these solutions that you delivered today, which is the fragile and conflict-affected state strategy of the IMF. The first time the IMF was playing in that arena. You talked today about the big divergence between countries and where low-income countries are in this very shrinking fiscal space, growing debt. I think half of them are at or near a debt crisis. What does it mean for fragile and conflict-affected states that the bilateral foreign aid is going down, that their debt situation is worse? I know we talk about a soft landing, but it feels like for them, they're in a very different place. What's the model for them? What is the solutions-oriented model to get them out of this moment?
We are working on a kind of a three-pronged approach as we engage with countries that face grave difficulties. One is to help them on the governance side, on the policy front, so they advance, they get better. The second one is to mobilize more assistance from others. We take our role to use programs, and we actually have now a record high number of programs, including in fragile states, so we can catalyze more funding for these countries. And three, recognize that the ultimate difficulty comes from conflicts and you know, the fact that there is no peace in some of these neighborhoods. And then what we do is we work with regional structures, we work with other organizations to bring forward attention to solving these problems. I mean, we are not a peace building organization, but we have some convening capacity to get attention, to zero in on the Sahel, to zero in on the Horn of Africa, on Sudan, on countries that need more attention. I must say, it is very troubling that you would have a conflict like the one in Sudan, and it's not on Andrea's top list of stories to write. Yeah, that would be I mean, we do what we can to stabilize countries, and in some cases, there is progress. Take Somalia. Somalia was seen as sort of very difficult to pull out of the brink. Somalia is doing better, but unfortunately, the fragile country situation has not gotten in totality better. At the fund, we prioritize work there. We actually give people bonus points when they work in fragile states, because we want to work with those that need our help the most. We work with the bank very closely. We work with regional development banks to...
Kristalina Georgieva, preguntada sobre los riesgos que suponen los conflictos internacionales al crecimiento global, reconocía que trabajan con enormes dificultades pero que se trabaja y se avanza por movilizar más asistencia a estos países, tomando un papel más activo por parte del Fondo Monetario Internacional, así como los países más desarrollados, para ayudar a los estados más frágiles. Decía, reconocemos las dificultades de estos conflictos, no solo en los países enfrentados, sino también el impacto que tiene en sus vecinos, y por ello dice, habla de brindar más oportunidades, más atención a estos países, tener más capacidad, más peso para reducir tensiones, y reconocía progresos en Sudán y en Somalia. Decía, hacemos lo que podemos por estabilizar a estos países.
In my second term, it is actually to teach us and then help our members to think of the unthinkable. Because the unthinkable is going to happen. And we have to have and actually we are building this muscle, so we anticipate and then we respond quickly, and we lean forward to target the most vulnerable. Could that be unthinkable that comes from a small country? Of course, this is possible. If you get a small country developing terrorist capabilities in a world of technology where drones can go anywhere, yeah, small country can cause big trouble. Yes. So how do you counter that? Well, you counter it with the tools of development. You make it so that countries actually have opportunities and alternatives to doing something unthinkable. I was, as many of you know, I was humanitarian crisis commissioner for 5 years. This is what helped me to be a good managing director in my first term when COVID hit. Because this is what I was wired to do, think of the unthinkable.
Let's go now to Jordan Schwartz, who's Executive Vice President of the Inter-American Development Bank. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thank you, Andrea. A question about cooperation, since that was the call for engagement at the end of your speech. I think over the course of your tenure at the fund, we've watched the institution evolve further from one focused traditionally on balance of payments adjustment, fiscal management, to one ever more concerned with the impact of finance, whether it is climate change or productivity, vulnerability, and equity, some of the points that you've raised. And that's brought, I think, the IMF closer to the multilateral development banks and ourselves closer to the fund. I was just wondering if you could give us a sense of where you see collaboration going across the international financial institutions.
I mean, it is very important that institutions do what they're best at and do not venture in areas where they don't have comparative advantage. For us at the fund, what we are best at is to take the vital signs of each and every economy and then identify areas of risks and opportunities for these economies, in particular with regard to risks associated with balance of payment, which is our origin. But as the world has become more complex and interconnected, we cannot separate balance of payment needs from policy choices countries make. We have to think about those. And there we find it very useful to partner with organizations that have deeper sectoral knowledge. I'll give you one example. We have the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, long-term financing instrument to create fiscal space for climate policies, adaptation, mitigation. We benefit tremendously from your work, from the work of the World Bank, in understanding what are the key parameters for the climate performance of a country. Where is the intensity of emissions? Where is vulnerability to shocks? So then we can draw from there macro policy conclusions and integrate it in our own work.
En directo continúa ese informe de perspectivas sobre la economía global elaborado por el Fondo Monetario Internacional. En directo su directora gerente, Kristalina Georgieva, hablando de contribuir con más y mejor gasto en educación y ayuda en I+D+I, porque dicen que las economías avanzadas, las que lideran la innovación, muestran lo que funciona en las industrias del capital riesgo, ecosistemas que no solo aportan financiación, sino conocimiento, asesoramiento y redes profesionales. En directo, analizando algunas ideas a preguntas de los asistentes para identificar oportunidades de mejora en el crecimiento global.
All right. Thank you.
La gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional, Kristalina Georgieva, dejando bastantes apuntes de este informe sobre las perspectivas de crecimiento mundial, en el que, recordemos, no ha dado ninguna cifra de crecimiento. De momento nos quedamos con esa anterior proyección publicada en el mes de julio, en la que estimaba un crecimiento del 3,2%, crecimiento global, PIB global para este 2024, y una décima menos, al 3,2%. En el año 2025. Hablaba Kristalina Georgieva que su principal preocupación es una desaceleración sincronizada del crecimiento global, y por ello hablaba de una primera área de reformas, es decir, hacer que los mercados laborales funcionen para las personas, porque nos enfrentamos a grandes retos demográficos, una demografía profundamente desigual, con poblaciones jóvenes en aumento y sociedades envejecidas en otros. Por ello también hablaba de movilizar capital, era el segundo punto de este informe. El tercer ámbito, que hacía alusión a la mayor productividad, decía también reducir burocracia, mayor inversión en educación e I+D, para contribuir a que las economías avanzadas, las que lideran esa innovación, muestren lo que funciona. Hablaba de industrias de capital riesgo, ecosistemas que aportan financiación, pero también conocimiento. También recordaba que a nivel mundial el ritmo de reformas se ha ido desacelerando desde la crisis financiera a medida que ha ido aumentando el descontento. También hablaba de la apuesta decidida por la inteligencia artificial, porque dice, muestra mayores oportunidades para lograr mayor productividad. Recordaba un informe elaborado recientemente por el Fondo, en el que dice que si se gestiona bien esta herramienta, la inteligencia artificial, tiene el potencial de impulsar el crecimiento hasta en 8 décimas, un 0,8% al PIB global, porque dice la inteligencia artificial no tiene fronteras, ya está en todos los teléfonos inteligentes del mundo, y por ello decía, podemos ayudar a las economías a crecer. Y una alusión también, mención a la transición a las energías renovables, apostar por mayores inversiones en la transición a las energías verdes, a la descarbonización, porque dice tiene gran poder de transformación de las economías. También proyectaba, eso sí, un crecimiento a medio plazo que va a ser mediocre, decía, no muy inferior textualmente al anteriormente registrado en la pandemia, pero también recordaba las tensiones, los riesgos geopolíticos, los países que están en guerra, no solo el este de Europa o Oriente Medio, también países en África como Sudán o Somalia, aunque reconocía que se han hecho progresos muy importantes, pero volvía a incidir en esa importancia de movilizar capital, porque dice hay abundante dinero en todo el mundo, pero a menudo no en los lugares correctos ni en los tipos de inversión correctos. Así es como concluía esa comparecencia de la directora gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional.